While the addition and change to some key aspects that empowered Bone Spirit Necromancer was absolutely going to make everybody run over and try the build and see how much better it was, I don't think that anybody expected to be running a build with no generators, no cooldown reduction, no decrepify, no weird reap for corpse generation. Nope, this is a bone on bone on bone build. Bone is your spender, bone is your generator, and bone is your cooldown reduction, except none of these skills intrinsically say any of those stats across the board. Welcome to the hybrid Bone Spirit Necromancer that on the current trash tier gear that I have right now, after randomly dying in a tier 90 and thinking it was too hard, just kind of cruise through this tier 100. Now, the damage is a little low as it stands right now, but once you see my gear, I think you'll get a better understanding of why that is. And I think that the potential for this build is omega high, because where Bone Spear is like fantastic at being able to run and gun in speed farm, it's typically not very tanky enough and can actually suffer for not having fast enough kill speed against really tanky monsters. Whereas Bone Spirit was always clunky and slow, but pretty tanky and ridiculously efficient at ending the life of anything that looked like a boss or even resembled an elite monster. And when you put these two things together, what you get is pretty astoundingly fantastic, because I never thought I'd have this combination of 6 skills on a skill bar and actually be successful with it. Now I'm going to have a D4 planner down below with everything that you could possibly need to look at, but I basically want to walk through everything here for people who don't like that or want to understand the decisions that I'm making with my gear. But go ahead, skip around to the timestamps. I'll have everything listed below so you can just go to the part that you want to look at. And again, the D4 planner will be there in case that's your preferred method of learning about the build. But basically the entirety of the build revolves around the fact that they added Shattered Spirit to this game, and it is pretty powerful, not just as like this cool thing to increase, how many bone splinters you have kind of flying around and do this kind of weird pipe bomb approach to playing the game, but that 6 essence per enemy hit, as well as the change to Bone Spirit and Dreadful Bone Spirit, basically means that this omega nuke of a skill is our essence generator, except that Bone Spear, applying vulnerable and dealing damage, is also our mana battery through exposed flesh. But that's not also the only thing. Well, Bone Prison is also our essence generator. That's right. Everything does damage, everything applies vulnerable, everything generates essence. It's just, it's all in on all bone. It's max calcification here. It's pretty bananas. Let's go ahead and start in the skill tree, because it's going to look a little bit different than some of the other builds that you typically see with Bone Spirit or Bone Spear, because we're basically not using a corpse consumption package at all, so that we can actually fit all of the skills on here. For people who are a little bit too timid to run with absolutely no generator, go ahead and just swap 1 more point back over to Acolyte Splinters here to also increase your critical strike chance, and then use this thing as a phenomenal generator. It's going to benefit from all of our essence generation increase that we have on our gear and in our stats. Obviously maxing out everything here, so Hewed Flesh just be able to generate some corpses, max essence, max increased damage to our Bone Spear, and then Bone Spear with Supernatural Bone Spear. Now here is one of the issues that the build would be running in if it wasn't a hybrid, and that is the fact that they actually changed how the splintering aspect works. Way back in the day, if you had splintering aspect on your character, if you cast Bone Spear, it just applied vulnerable to everything. That was clearly a bug and not intended. They fixed splintering aspect so that it no longer made the first monster that you hit vulnerable, which is what the aspect actually says. But when the shards from your Bone Spear would fly back towards you, you would actually still apply vulnerable from those shards flying back. And it looks like in Season 3, even though it is undocumented, they have fixed this bug as well. What it basically means is that Bone Spear can't apply vulnerable naturally to the first target hit, which is incredibly important since the entirety of a bone build relies on having 100% uptime on vulnerable across the board. And while there is a world where your little companion might be able to supplement this later on, right now it's definitely not good enough. So where you would normally want to be running Paranormal Bone Spear for the additional crit chance, as well as the 2 additional bone shards, which is actually a huge increase in damage and your ability to generate essence, we literally need to be able to apply vulnerable here. But luckily enough for us, Bone Spear is actually just our generator as well as our vulnerable applicator, so this thing not putting out as much damage as possible actually isn't that big of a deal, because Bone Spirit is where we want to be dumping all of our damage when possible. Blood Mist, just to be able to generate the corpse. If we still had Metamorphosis, I wouldn't even be using this skill, I would actually just have Bone Splinters as well, but you need Unstoppable somewhere, and this is really the only way to get it. It also allows us to Corpse Tendrils to be able to then drop down a Bone Spirit when you're still playing in a very classic approach to the build. Bone Prison is so much better in Season 3 now that you can very freely run through it. Your pets can, your friends can, but enemies can't. On top of that, it's also another great source of being able to apply Vulnerable. And then I'm currently using Ghastly Prison, generates more Essence. Now, I've talked a lot about the fact that our Bone skills are actually also our cooldown reduction. That's later on in the skill tree. But if you feel like your essence actually completely managed because your gear is better than mine, you can also use Dreadful Bone Prison to be able to reduce your cooldowns even further. I am using Death's Embrace here. Obviously, we're like a Bone Spirit build, right? But we're also Bone Spear, and you might be saying, well, why aren't you maxing out Death's Reach? If the Abattoir of Zero taught me one thing, especially about Bone Spear, it's that damage reduction from distant and trying to maintain distance from enemies is all well and good, but the moment that they're next to you, that's when they're actually a threat. Corpse Tendrils applying Vulnerable just for another source to have maximum uptime. We will be messing around with a Blood Orb, Blood Artisan's Cuirass speed farming Bone Spirit build, but basically playing for the past couple days at the season start, I have been using that armor. And what I generally found was that it's too hard to fit the Bone Spear package, the Bone Spirit package, and the Blood Orb package to make that armor really shine. So while you can definitely use it for the +4 ranks so you can increase your speed farming potential, I think if you're really trying to push Nightmare Dungeons, if you're trying to get through the vault efficiently, I don't think we're using that right now, but look forward to another build guide, because that build's always been my favorite version of Bone Spirit, and we'll definitely get to it this season. Obviously maxing out Bone Spirit and then Dreadful Bone Spirit. I've already talked about the fact that basically you don't need the crit chance from Ghastly Bone Spirit anymore, because they went and gave us an aspect that says 25% crit chance on Bone Spirit. Ghastly Bone Spirit is effectively a dead passive at this point, and you absolutely want to be using Dreadful. You at the end of the day will not need 3 points in Serration, because you'll be at 100% chance to crit with maximum uptime on Bone Storm, and you won't even need Grasping Veins either. But at the state that I'm at right now with my gear, I still need this critical strike chance to approach 100% for both Spirit and Spear. Maxing out Compound Fracture, Avulsion, and then Rapid Ossification. Do not sleep on how important it is to be reducing all of your bone cooldowns by 1.5 seconds. Every single time that you cast a Bone Spirit at max essence, this actually just reduces all of them by 3 seconds. So basically Bone Spirit, after it crits, which already cuts its cooldown in half, is ready to use immediately again. Standalone, Memento Mori, full-on Bone Storm, and then Ossified Essence to round it out, and that's what the skill tree looks like. If you weren't hybridizing in this way, you could put the Corpse Consumption package back on, you could even afford to throw a Sacrilegious Ring on, and you can go back to relying on that crutch for the efficiency of the build. But with near perfect gear, or at least like 80% perfect gear, I think that this build does not have Essence issues and should be able to spam all of its skills near continuously, so I just don't think that you need it, and you can focus on better scaling the actual damage from the effects themselves rather than using the corpse package. But if you like it, you could definitely use it. For the gear, we're currently using Deathless Visage, just good on both versions of this build, but obviously it vastly increases our ability to generate essence from Bone Spear procs, and then just the max essence helps the Bone Spear to do more damage, and then it says damage reduction, which is just a nice stat to be able to put on this helmet. I am using a Total Armor Max Life with damage reduction from close. I just don't have a 4th defensive stat armor at this point. I am trying to fit in more intelligence as well as more additive damage in all stats whenever I can, just to be able to basically dump out and kill things before they get anywhere near me. But Disobedience returns to the build. I haven't really played around with Juggernaut. I personally don't think that the Necromancer can afford to not be able to evade whenever it wants, but like, if you like it, you like it. For the gloves, we want attack speed, crit chance to restore primary essence, and then Bone Spear. You'll see that mine aren't perfect stats, and I only have 3 ranks on Bone Spear. I just upgraded to these gloves, so they feel pretty good. This is where I'm putting Swelling Curse for that big 25% chance to crit on Bone Spirit, and then also the maximum essence whenever you hit an enemy. For the pants, Total Armor, maximum life, damage reduction, and then damage reduction. And if you did not have a secondary relevant damage reduction, intelligence are all stats here. You could even go with ranks to Bone Prison, Prison to reduce its cooldown even further, or Ranks to Blood Mist to be able to reduce that cooldown even further, since that's not going to interact with our Bone cooldown reduction system. But then here's where we're obviously putting Shielding Storm. The thing is absolutely nutty. You need this on every build. For the boots, movement speed, any good resistance or dodge chance or essence cost reduction, and then Ranks to Bone Spirit and Ranks to Corpse Tendrils. And then we're also using basically any movement speed aspect that you can possibly find. I'm really enjoying Slaughter this season. One, makes you faster when you're running through a town, actually faster than a horse. And then two, you get the big movement speed moving between packs, which is realistically the majority of your travel time. So I've actually come around on this aspect, and I like it a lot better than I used to previously. Our amulet is Trash City. It's actually still a 646 item power amulet. I just haven't found a better one yet. But movement speed, Macabre skills is both going to work for Bone Prison, which is Macabre, Bone Spirit, which is Macabre as well. And then Evulsion for the damage on both Bone Spear and Bone Spirit. Now that being said, I would much prefer cooldown reduction here, essence cost reduction, a total armor roll, or a damage reduction roll, so it'd be easier to be able to use Blood Artisan's Cuirass without feeling too bad about it. For the rings in general, what you're looking for is resource generation, maximum essence, critical strike chance, and then either a critical strike damage boost like bone damage, physical damage, or crit damage, or maximum life. Remember now that maximum life from your gear gets added to your base before multipliers like your ruby gems in your armor. So you'll see that we're actually sitting on 12,000 life right now. I'm only level 90, and I only have a imperfect roll here, a really imperfect roll here, and then no maximum life on either one of my rings. And also the maximum life roll on Lidless isn't perfect either. So we could actually be somewhere around 20,000 life right now very easily. So don't sleep on dropping maximum life onto your ring slots this season, because barrier generation from Lidless Wall, from Shielding Storm and Bone Storm is basically just going to double your total effective life. So 20,000 life with 20,000 barrier on a Bone Spear Necromancer is going to feel real good. Obviously, we're using Shattered Spirit. You actually don't care about the damage roll for the Bone Splinters. Sadly, the Bone Splinters are read as having 0 essence when you cast Bone Spirit, and this doesn't trigger off of Blood Artisan's Cuirass. So the damage from the Bone Splinters is just nice for 1, being able to trigger Exposed Flesh, 2, being able to trigger Abhorrent Decrepify if you are using it. But other than that, really doesn't serve a purpose. Just having a max roll would just mean you're doing slightly more damage. Then for the other ring, this is where we're going to be using Exposed Flesh. The best part about this build, and I should have started off the video with this, is that this is in your season's journey. This is in your season's journey. Serration is in your season's journey. This is in the Codex of Power. This is in the Codex of Power. And this is in the Codex of Power. So basically, the only thing you need to go find to be able to survive at the rate that I just did with the crap gear that we have is Lidless Wall from Lord Seer. Basically, every Necro build is going to want to have one of these in its pocket. So if the worst thing that you need to get is a single unique item that you can target farm, I'm not complaining about it. You don't even really need this helmet. It's just kind of nice to have. And in fact, I would prefer to have maximum essence with maximum life, total armor, and then cooldown reduction as opposed to this, but I just don't have a good replacement for it yet. But once you have a perfect exposed flesh, being able to generate all of that extra essence with all of our additional resource generation is going to, literally solve all of your essence issues. You're just going to go infinite on essence with Bone Spear alone. As a side note, putting lucky hit chance onto either one of your rings also isn't a terrible skill. And in fact, I would prioritize that over any additive damage, since we're going to have a ton of additive crit damage over the rest of our build. I already brought up Lidless Wall. You need Lidless Wall. It's just the best item. A chance to restore essence, maximum life, attack speed, maximum essence, and then infinite Bone Storms. You can't argue against this thing. Until you have it, you can absolutely be using either Serration or Grasping Veins on a two-handed sword. That's what I was doing, and it was working just fine. If you are dying a little bit too often and still using Bone Splinters, throw on a shield with really good reduction stats, as well as cooldown reduction and essence cost reduction, and maybe some maximum life. And then go ahead and throw the Might aspect onto there. Free 20% damage reduction will suit you just fine for survivability until you have Lidless. I am using a wand. I've thought about a couple different approaches to how you would play this, but because Exposed Flesh is just so important, I do think that wand still is the best play. intelligence, all stats, vulnerable, crit, damage to close, damage with core, any one of them would work well for you. I would prefer to go with dual crit, so regular crit and crit with bone, because you should be at 100% chance to crit with all of your skills, and Bone Spirit isn't a core skill, so we want damage that actually works for it as well. But if you can't find it, core skill damage for Bone Spirit would work perfectly fine. Here's where I'm using Splintering. Splintering, being able to apply vulnerable, is so much more important now that they have fixed this aspect. That being said, once I have good enough cooldown reduction on my gear, as well as essence generation, I think that you can manage permanent vulnerable uptime between your Seneschal, Corpse Tendrils, and Bone Prison, and then you wouldn't need this anymore. You can then swap Bone Spirit down to Supernatural to be able to get the additional crit and the additional procs of Bone Shards, and then you can very easily throw on Serration for a huge damage multiplier to the build. Book of the Dead, sacrificing Skirmishers, sacrificing Shadow for the Essence. Now, the vulnerable proc here would be a higher damage multiplier across the board. What I like about the Essence is that since we are regenerating percentage Essence, this becomes a lot more valuable, as well as just increasing the total cap of Essence so that all of our Essence generation tools are never overfilling and we're getting the maximum benefit out of them. And then obviously we're sacrificing Iron Golem for crit damage. Makes sense. I do not think that my Paragon system is perfect just yet, but you're going to see that I'm investing more in maximum life nodes as well as armor, because we are trying to build very tanky here. And again, maximum life is now much more valuable that it's applying to your base life and your flat life on gear, whereas before it only applied to your base life and then your flat life was added on top of it. So I will be picking up this node cluster right here, but we're using Sacrificial for the 1.1 as well as the increase to the magic nodes here, building up into Bone Graft, and this is where we're going to be putting Essence for the maximum dex bonus. You could also put a magic node boosting glyph here and then drop this later on. I don't think that that's wrong, but I'm personally not doing it at this point. Like I said, we're building into maximum life and armor because we want as much of that as possible. Over into Scent of Death, big legendary node here, Imbiber for the largest additive bonus that we can get, and then I am picking up damage to healthy because we want monsters out of the healthy status as soon as possible so we can actually get the bonus from Essence. And you'll see that I'm building into Flesh Eater, and I'm obviously not picking up the Flesh Eater node because we're not consuming corpses. If you are, you would. But here is where I'm going to be putting Corporeal as an additional multiplier for the blue nodes here, and then obviously huge damage to elites and resistances. You can't complain. Our last board, we're going to be building into Bloodbath as another dex node, and then this is where we're going to put Exploit. For the Seneschal Companion, I'll be honest with you, I don't really know. Let me just talk about what I'm currently doing, and you can vibe with whether or not it works for you. I'm using Focus Fire as one of the best ways of applying a lot of damage effects to a ton of enemies, using Arcing support to further empower that. Here's where we're using Efficiency to gain crit chance against targets. Again, once you have 100% chance to crit, you won't need this anymore. And then Mockery, it just being able to taunt is really great for survivability, especially on a Bone Spirit Necromancer, where typically you're waiting on Grasping Veins to get that ability back, but your Seneschal being able to do it for you is phenomenal. And taking off Protect, because he's going to keep casting it, but being able to generate Barrier for us was really, really strong. I don't think we need it so much with Lidless Wall anymore, so I'm definitely going to be swapping this over to something else. But any long cooldown, whether you're going to be using Flash of Adrenaline, is probably what I'm ultimately going to swap this to now that I have Lidless Wall, just for that obviously great amount of damage bonus here. We're using Safeguard for being able to apply even more damage reduction to us whenever they apply this, Tactical to reduce its cooldown, and then Duration to increase the length of time that it's applied to us. I think basically swapping from Protect when you don't have the gear over to Adrenaline when you do have the gear is a play. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that right now. Obviously, Resource Support is a phenomenal option again to use with a very fast acting quick melee attack. I just haven't leveled mine up yet, and it generating 2 essence every single time that it attacks isn't as valuable as it actively taunting monsters for me, actively giving me crit chance to get up to 100%, or just being able to apply it to the majority of monsters. So I think once you're done with needing to use any of these, you would swap over to the essence generation, because even in the end game, that should still be pretty good, just to make sure you don't hit any dry spots where you run out of essence. But yeah, this is the hybrid Bone Spirit build. Right now, I think I have maybe another like 20 to 40% worth of like efficiency and damage to gain without needing to really change anything else other than actually getting good stats on my gear, high rolls on those same stats, and then being able to swap up to like an item power 925 wand with good stats on it and not ultimate skill damage. And then once I don't need to worry about vulnerable so often, I can actually just maintain uptime across the rest of my skills. Then I can put Serration on here for another 40% damage multiplier. The areas where growth is available are numerous, and it's just like stupid fun to play this build. Being able to go max range with Lidless Wall and Bone Spear for speed farming is great. The moment you walk up to a tanky monster, just blowing it away with Bone Spirit. When you're doing the world boss, if you stand directly in the middle of the world boss and cast Bone Spirit, it completely refills the entirety of your orb because every one of your shards hits them, and each one of them gets you 6 essence plus your resource gen. So you go from 0 to 100 immediately, instantly reducing the cooldown of Bone Spirit, and then you literally just use spending essence through Bone Spirit to reduce its cooldown even further, and then you cast it again in instant refill. This also works on any boss that's big enough and stands still for a second or two. You basically got to get right into the middle of it, but then every single one of the shards will hit that target, immediately refilling your essence gauge. And then once you're in density, you can basically cast this in any direction, and every single shard will hit the monsters around you, again, completely refilling your essence glow. It is astounding how many times you can cast Bone Spirit in a row with the addition of Shattered Spirit without blinking an eye. It's the most fun I've had on a Bone Spirit build, and I'm glad it's finally getting its chance to shine in this season. I would love to hear from you. Have you tried out anything similar? Do you think that just going with straight Bone Spirit or Bone Spirit would have a better result for you? Let me know down in the comments. If you're new here to the channel and you liked what you saw here, go ahead and subscribe. I'm trying to bring you this level of content every single time that I put out a video. That's why it's taken me 3 days to get this done, because I didn't just want to like overhype it and be like, oh look, this thing's amazing. I wanted to go prove that I could go do tier 100 nightmare dungeons at level 90 with my crap gear before I tried to sell this to anybody. Also, if you wouldn't mind leaving a like on the video, it really helps me out in the YouTube algorithm, which we're trying to get back into now that the season is fully here. So thank you so much for watching this video. As always, I hope that you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.